Welcome, Zeke. It's a pleasure to have you on this tutorial. So, as I know, you are from Replicate, and yeah, would love to know more about you.
Yeah, hi Shannon. Thanks for having me on. It's pretty exciting. Yeah, I'm a software engineer. I work at a company called Replicate. If you haven't heard of it, it's an app and a service and a platform for running open source AI models in the cloud. So it makes it pretty easy to grab a little bit of code, bring it into your own application, and run language models, image generation models, and um, a bunch of different tools like that. So we can dig in a little more, but yeah, really excited to be here. Thanks for
Yeah,
having me.
yeah, pleasure. Yeah, we would love to know more about Replicate and what it has to offer. Could you maybe share with us, like, what are some of the available models that you support and how one could get started?
Sure. So we've got lots of models. If you go to replicate.com, by default, you'll see this sort of like splash screen that gives you an idea of the different modalities. So you can use models that generate images like stable diffusion, which most people have heard of by now. You can use models that generate text, like the very popular Llama model and Mistral. Um, can do things like captioning images. So Lava is a really cool model where you give it a combination of an image and a text prompt, and you can use it to answer questions about the provided image. So give an example here. Um, the example here is, are you allowed to swim here? Let's actually click on this and take a look. So here's an input of a body of water, and you can ask a question, are you allowed to swim here? You could ask another question like, what is in this picture? Is it hot or cold outside? Something like that. And you can run this right on the Replicate website, and you'll get some kind of, for this model, it'll produce text-based output that um, answers your query. For some reason, this one maybe is taking a little bit of time. Um, I'll leave that there, and we can jump over to another model. So here is the new version of Llama that Meta just released, the 405 billion parameter model, which people are really excited about right now. You can see an example of you give it a prompt and you get back a response just like the sort of like, you know, popular language models that we're all familiar with, like Claude and ChatGPT and stuff like that. The cool thing is, in addition to running this stuff on the website, you can also use the API. So if you jump over to these different tabs, you can see how you would actually run this exact same code using Node.js or Python or just plain Perl. So if you want to see the various capabilities of all the different models, you can go to the Explore page, and we've got some featured models there, as well as some different use cases like generating music, generating structured data like JSON, all those sorts of things. So hopefully that kind of gives you an indication of uh, the gist of what Replicate is about. So this came back. The image features a wooden pier or a dock extending out into a large body of water. Sky is cloudy, suggesting that the weather might be cool or overcast. So you can use this to like describe images, but you can also use it to ask questions. Like a common thing that people do is, or a common sort of example is, you take a picture of your refrigerator and you say, "Here's my fridge. What can I make for dinner tonight?" And it can actually analyze all the ingredients and come up with a recipe for you based on what's available in your fridge. So lots of really interesting use cases there. So jumping back to, oh, I don't want to spill the beans there, but yeah, jumping back to you, I know you've built a Streamlit demo that uses Replicate. Maybe we can take a look at that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so we have the Streamlit demo, which allows you to make a selection on like the large language models that you like to try out. Like there's like Gemma 2, Llama 3, and the latest one as well, and also like the Mistral model. Um,
Yeah,
and
so I popped this one open and I just said I'm going on a picnic. What should I bring? And it gave some pretty interesting suggestions there.
right,
Um, and one of the cool things about this is that it retains the sort of history as you type, right? So
it
that's
does.
something I could say. Um, what else can I bring? Am I forgetting anything? It's going to add it's going to add to the conversation based on the previous stuff. So this is very familiar if you ever used anything like ChatGPT or Claude.
Right. And yeah, the cool thing is you could adjust the parameters on the sidebar. And I mean, users could definitely, like add new features, add, rack capabilities to it and make it their own.
So when I change the model here on the sidebar, is that going to take the entire context of the existing conversation and just feed it into the new model that I chose?
Theoretically, it should retain the chat history.
Hmm.
Mhm.
So let's ask. I live in Berkeley. If it could give me a local suggestion for where to have the picnic. Oh, we might have confused it by switching the model here. Let's do a quick copy paste. Open this over here
Mhm.
and try changing the model here and say, I'm going on a picnic. Where should I go? I live in Berkeley. So I'm curious to know how you chose these different models.
Right. Yeah, so I guess it was built a few weeks ago. So I guess there must have been some updates. Yeah, so definitely will. Okay, it's taking
Oh,
some more time. All right, now it works.
oh, these are totally relevant. Yeah, I would probably pick Lake Anza.
Yeah, I mean the model selection here are just random. Yeah,
Mhm.
users could definitely plug in other models that they like.
Okay, cool.
Mhm.
Um, so this is going to be an open source app, right? This Streamlit demo here.
Right, yeah. So we're sharing all of the code from this app. So it'll be available in the Streamlit Cookbook repo on GitHub. It's not currently released yet, so yeah, we're planning on doing that very soon. Probably at the time when this video goes live.
Okay. Does the cookbook itself already exists?
No, not yet.
No. Okay.
The
So this is going to
Streamlit,
be the first. This is going to be the
yes,
first demo in the cookbook. Okay.
right,
Very
exactly,
exciting.
right.
Cool. So can we talk a little bit about how Streamlit works? It's a Python tool, right? Like you
It
install it
is
as a Python package, and then you can
right.
write a little bit of Python code to make a compelling demo.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I mean, Streamlit is a kind of like a it's a front end UI that you could add to your Python scripts. It's compatible with all of, like the entire Python ecosystem, especially Replicate. You could add LM power to your apps with only a few lines of code. You'll soon see in another segment of this video where we kind of take a deeper dive into like the code blocks underlying the demo app. Yeah, so as mentioned already, it's compatible with all of the Python libraries, like the typical data science stack, like NumPy, Pandas, Matplotlib for visualization. For those into analytics, I mean they're all supported in there. It has widgets so that you could add interactivity to it. Um, and we have several places that you could go to get started. Let me see if I could.
So while you're pulling that up, I can kind of mention, one of the reasons that Replicate exists is because the founders, particularly Andreas Janssen, who was a machine learning engineer at Spotify,
Mm,
he sort of had this continually recurring issue where he would be working on some kind of language model or some kind of machine learning model. So, for example, he'd be building a model to do uh, source extraction on audio files. So it would be like extracting the various instruments and the vocal track from a piece of music to be able to do interesting things with them. Sort of like identifying the instruments or changing the volume of different parts of the song.
mm.
But each time he created one of these machine learning models, he didn't really have a very easy way to share it with different stakeholders on the team. So he often ended up creating a lot of sort of infrastructure and Python scaffolding to be able to set up a web application to demo um, his app. So Streamlit, as far as I understand, exists solve exactly those kinds of problems, right? Like you
Right.
have something that you want to that you're using Python to build,
Mhm,
and you want to easily put a front end on it so that people
mhm.
can see it and interact with it. So
Exactly.
there's a lot of overlap, I think, here between the reason that Replicate exists and some of the problems that Streamlit solves.
Right, exactly. I mean, there are a lot of features that you could potentially utilize, and as you mentioned, the co-founder could potentially use Streamlit apps, and I mean, Streamlit library, so that he could definitely convert that into a more simplified web app in terms of the coding, so to
Hmm.
say. And yeah, I mean, it's very quick to prototype, and there's a lot of capabilities for those who are looking to have the app, production ready. I mean, one of the resources that I typically go to when creating Streamlit apps is the Streamlit documentation. It has a very intuitive API reference here. You could go through all of the various, features that you want to add to your app. If you want
Hmm.
to add display text, you want to add text elements, you want to, import data. There's a lot of widgets for you, very interactive. Um, import data, convert data, using other Python libraries and then displaying it in a data frame. You could add visualizations to it. It supports all of the major data visualization libraries, and there's also built-in visualization, and it's very it's tuned and optimized for the Streamlit app. So it works out of the box with minimal coding. You could just put in your data frame, and then it'll just figure out what to plot. It supports everything like Plotly, GraphViz, Bokeh, Altair, and Matplotlib, several more.
Hmm.
Yeah, there's a lot of widgets for you to use, buttons, selections, color selection, numerical input, date selection, text
Got it.
elements. Yeah, so
So,
many more. Yeah.
so in these docs, is there a sort of default place you would go to find out how you make uh, like an example of making a request to a third-party service, like an API, and then taking that data and
Right.
rendering it?
Right. For that, it's going beyond, like what Streamlit offers. So it's more or less
Mhm.
kind of like how you want to plug Streamlit, how you want to plug your own workflow into Streamlit. So
Mhm.
we do have like tutorial blog posts. It's called Streamlit blog. So you could go to blog.streamlit.io,
Mhm.
and it has a lot of community submitted content there. So you get to see a lot of the use cases. I mean, we could hop there as well. You get to see a lot of the community use cases on like building a rack chat bot, multi-doc Q&A, and using several other tech tools available in the tech ecosystem, and then plugging it essentially into a Streamlit app. And many are saying that it just very easy to prototype and create the app, and it'll be up and running. Especially helpful for like machine learning engineers or software engineers to quickly spin up a Streamlit app without knowing the front end elements like React or JS. So that has been a pretty game changer for a lot of the teams, and also like enthusiasts and hobbyists. Like if you know basic Python, it's very easy to get started. Just kind of like plug and play, and it'll work.
Totally. Yeah, if I can grab the screen back for a minute, I can show where people might start on the Replicate side.
Right.
So if you're on the Replicate website and you go to the docs, there is a page called Run a Model from Python, and it's pretty straightforward. You're just installing the pip installing the Replicate Python package. You put in your Replicate API key, and then it's just a few lines of code to actually run the model. So this is where the Streamlit part would come in, right? You would run a prompt. You would run the model, which could be an image generation model or a language model like Llama, and then you just get back output, which is a Python object which either has text in it, or if it generated images or audio or other types of media, then it'll be URLs to those things. You can actually take this output and put it right into your Streamlit context for rendering the Streamlit.
Yeah, I mean that's a good rundown. So In terms of the access to the replicate model, what do users typically need to do to get started?
Yeah, all you have to do is go to replicate.com, click around on models. You can run them without even creating an account just to get a sense of how they work. Um, and then sign up is free, and you get a little bit of time to actually run the models before you have to start paying for them. So depending on the model, they're billed differently. You're either billed by the second for how long the model is running, or for some models, it's based on like the output, like the number of text tokens that are input or output, or the um, in some cases it's you're billed per image based on the image outputs. So it varies by the model type, but um, you can create an account for free.
Mhm.
Um, Once you hit your threshold of using all your free usage, you can put in a credit card and then you pay by usage for there. So there's not any like tiered plans or anything right now. It's just pay per use. It's like
Right,
a metered metered billing.
right. Is there any functionality to kind of like limit the API call or kind of cap it up to a certain
Sure.
extent?
Yeah. So if you go to your account settings, if you want to make sure that you don't go over a certain amount, you can set a spend limit here. So you can say, um, you put in like a $10 spend limit, and then you'll be notified by email if you are about to hit that limit. So it's a
Mhm.
way to make sure you don't actually spend too much money.
Right. Okay. Right. Yeah. Definitely super helpful.
Yeah.
Especially I'm seeing a lot of, like people posting on Twitter, kind of like, okay, their API call is costing them several $1,000s in usage. Like maybe when their app goes viral or, something like that.
Yeah. So if you are creating an application, one thing that's really useful to do is set up an organization on Replicate that allows you to um, share access to different models and share billing with teams. So even if you're a small team or just a handful of people, um, it's best to set up an organization. That way, it's not just one individual's account, and then you can set up different. You can basically the whole team has access to setting the spend limits
Mhm.
and seeing the invoices and things like that. But all you need is a GitHub account to get started. So it just uses SSO through GitHub to log in. So it's just a few clicks to get up and running.
Right. Awesome. Is there any other, power tips that you'd like to share with users on Replicate?
Probably. uh, let's see. One thing to keep in mind is that your input and output. Let's see, your output data is if you make API calls is scrubbed from the response after 1 hour. So let's say you run. Um, what would maybe an example here? Let's say we are running Stable Diffusion 3, and you generate an image, and then you get this kind of JSON output, and the output has a URL in it. Um, this file is only going to stick around for an hour before it's going to be deleted, and the output of this prediction will be deleted. So if you are building an application and you want to be able to persist this data, a good thing to do is save these files. So um, that leads me to want to mention webhooks. So
Mhm.
if you're not familiar with webhooks, webhook is basically a way of saying when you make an API call, you say, here's a URL, call me back when you're done running this code so that my web service can handle the response. So you basically say, I want to run this model, and please hit my webhook when you're done. And that gives you a way to receive a response from your server and download the output data and download any images associated with it, so you can persist them on your side. So webhooks are definitely an essential part of building like a scalable web application. If you're just messing around and you're kind of just kicking the tires and playing with it, you don't really need webhooks. But as soon as you start building something real, you probably will.
Mhm.
We've got a video about how to set up webhooks on
Mhm.
YouTube, on our YouTube channel as well. Um, Also, there are, if you look at like the Node.js um, guide, there is um, there's a repository associated with it. So you can actually there's also a Next.js app. So there's like a bare bones Node.js app. There's also a Next.js app that has um, the webhook stuff built into it. So if you need some example code to get started,
Mhm,
I don't think we have that for the Python stuff. The
mhm,
Python thing just has kind of like a, uh, something to get you off the ground.
mhm,
But the webhooks are part of the API, so they're
mhm.
compatible with whatever language you're using.
And like for a typical LM model call, how many seconds would it take? And if there's a large, output being generated, um, yeah, how does it handle that? And is there any tips in order to work with that?
Sure. So when you're using a language model,
Mhm,
like let's see, let's search like we go to sorry, not lava llama.
mhm,
Llama 38B, you can see that this one's priced per token.
mhm,
And then you can see at the bottom of an output here how long it took to generate and how many tokens were generated. So some of these models are streaming, meaning as you run them, just sort of like when you're using ChatGPT
mhm,
and you see the response as if it's being typed out.
mhm,
That's not just doing that to look like a cool effect, like you're chatting with a robot, but actually that's the response being streamed back as the model is running. So um, that's built into a lot of models on Replicate. So you'll see, like here in the Node.js example, you're actually getting a replicate.stream call, and then you're streaming the tokens back
mhm,
as they come in. So you don't have to use streaming. You can also just concatenate all of the text until it's done and then save it. But if you're building something like a live chat application where you want that instantaneous response, then streaming is definitely a useful thing to take advantage of. Um, the performance varies by the model. So if we look at the Meta Llama models, you'll see uh, the number of parameters, like the 7 dB,
mhm,
is usually an indication. Well, it means how many sort of hyperparameters went into the original training of the model, but it kind of means how big the model is and how fast it is. So if you need better, more accurate responses from the model, you use a higher parameter model. If you
mhm,
need something uh, with a faster response time, that's also going to be, you know, cheaper as a result, then you run something with a lower parameter count.
mhm.
So if we look at Llama 370B, you'll see, actually, if you scroll down on the page here, I think we have something that shows, uh, we might have actually changed this output recently. So I'm not exactly sure. You can see this one took 8.9 seconds. If we look at some different examples, uh, the generation time varies based on the size of the input and the size of the output. So looks like we've only got one example for this one. But um, you can also see the predict time
Mhm,
as a metric
mhm,
in your JSON output. So one thing to do is just try different models and then see which one kind of fits the profile of the right sort of balance of uh, accuracy versus performance,
mhm.
like response time coming
Right,
back.
right.
Um,
Yeah, yeah.
Another thing to look out
Yeah.
for,
Mhm,
sorry to cut you off, but just one thing I want to mention is we have this little badge here that says warm.
mhm,
That's an indication that this model is, actively receiving traffic and it's already basically the model is warmed up and running. So
mhm,
um, when you're cruising around on the website looking for a model to run, if it says cold, that means it's probably not a particularly popular model.
mhm,
And if you make a request to it, you're actually going to be having to wait while the model boots. Like it takes
mhm.
time. So most of these meta models are, popular enough that they're warm all the time.
Okay, right.
That's another thing to keep in mind.
Would that be reflected in our app, I guess, like, maybe when we're calling it, maybe it'll lag for a bit, nothing appears, but then after a couple of seconds, then it started to generate the output?
Sure. Yeah. So you actually, I mean, regardless of how long the prediction takes to
Mhm.
start running, you'll get an API response
Oh,
instantaneously, no
right.
matter what.
Mhm,
So if you look at, let's see, we've got, there's actually a new version of the docs that we haven't released yet that
mhm,
I'm looking at. But so we look for status in here. You can see
mhm,
predictions have different statuses. So if you just start a prediction, in the very beginning you'll get a response that says starting,
mhm,
meaning the actual model is starting, and then processing means that the prediction, the actual uh, query that you've made is being run.
mhm,
So you can kind of like you can poll the API to get the status of these responses,
mhm,
or you can use webhooks. So you can configure the webhook
mhm.
so that it will send you a webhook event whenever any of these states changes. So
Right.
when it changes from starting to processing, you can get a webhook event.
Oh, okay. Right. Yeah. Yeah. That would definitely be super helpful instead of like showing like a blank screen, but having some message there.
Sure, yeah, like the model is booting.
Right.
Um, if you're building a you know a customer facing app and you need the app to be performant and you don't want to hit cold boots,
Mhm,
we have something called deployments.
mhm,
So a deployment is basically a private version of a model
mhm,
that lets you control the scaling. So um, for example, let's say we were um, do it. Let's see if I have any deployments already that
mhm,
I can just show you. Um, if I go to my dashboard here,
mhm,
all right, so I've got this employment called Zesty Zisper. So this is my own custom version of Whisper with some Whisper is like a OpenAI speech to text transcription model. And um, so my custom deployment here allows me to do some interesting things like I can choose the hardware that it's running on, and I can also configure the minimum and maximum instances
mhm,
that'll run. So if you're building like a production scale application and you want to make sure that you have a model that doesn't hit cold boots,
mhm,
you create your own deployment and then you can configure all of the performance characteristics of it in here. And then if you're no longer using it, like I stopped using this because it was just prototyping something.
mhm,
Then I can actually disable the deployment and I'm not paying anything for it. So it's still usage based,
mhm.
but by setting the minimum instances to 1, that means you're keeping an instance running around all the time and you're paying for it the whole time that it's running.
Uh,
So you incur a cost there, but what it means is that you're guaranteed to have a certain uh, performance responsiveness for your model.
right. Yeah. Super helpful. Yeah. Another question would probably be like, what are your advice for building a scalable app using Replicate? What are some of the factors to consider?
Um, yeah, so I think we have this great sort of AI expert who works with us sometimes named Hamel Hussein, and um, his recommendation for building an application or building a product is to start by using the most sophisticated model that you can, um, and then dialing back the capabilities until you find a certain threshold that still satisfies your requirements. So instead of going straight to the cheapest, fastest model, try using the model that you know is actually going to uh, satisfy the requirements of what you're trying to build. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Another one is use webhooks. So webhooks are just a much more performant and scalable way of dealing with your prediction data. So whether a model is warm or not, it's always going to take a little bit of time to run. It's not going to
Mhm,
be instantaneous.
right.
Different models have different performance characteristics. Of course, they're getting faster all the time. We now have image generation models that can make an image in 100 milliseconds or whatever, which is amazing. And a lot of them can even do them like on device without a GPU now.
Mhm,
So that's still improving all the time. But no matter what, there is a level of asynchrony involved that you have to account for when you're building a product. So webhooks give you a way to start on the right foot where you're receiving responses from Replicate and being able to proactively do something with them, like store
Mm,
them in a database. What else? Uh, it's a great idea to, if you're using input files, like
mm,
let's say you were running Lava to
mm,
help you generate recipes from images of your contents of your refrigerator, you want to upload those files somewhere to a publicly accessible web URL or providing them as input. You can just hand a base 64 blob to the URL and that
mm,
will work, but
mm,
it'll be very slow and it'll
mm,
be slow throughout the entire system. So you're better off dealing with URLs
mm.
as your currency of moving files around as inputs and outputs. Um, what else? Yeah, take advantage of streaming when the model supports it and when your use case needs it. But a lot of times, a lot of Replicate customers are just running these batch jobs that don't necessarily need to be immediately responding.
Mhm.
They're like cron jobs, basically. With those, you don't necessarily need to take advantage of streaming. You
Mm,
can just run the model, wait for the response in its entirety, and then save that.
right. Yep. Super helpful.
Yeah, hopefully that's useful.
Mhm,
In terms of like discovering models,
mhm,
you can search for models on the Replicate website,
mhm,
but there's also um, there are a couple endpoints. So there's searching public models, which is a new endpoint in the API that lets you actually do programmatically search for stuff. So here's an example. It's searching for hello and then getting back a hello world model. But you can take that a step further and actually there's an API endpoint that lists all the public models. So if you wanted to, you're trying to like find the right model for your use case, you can actually download the JSON data of every public model on Replicate and stuff it on your disk and search through it that way. So um, we have this like explore page that's sort of human curated and shows some different use cases, but it's kind of perpetually out of date because there's so much interesting stuff happening. So we have this API there to give you a way to kind of self-serve find all of the models that are out there.
yeah. Thanks for those tips and advices. Yeah.
Yeah.
Another pretty important topic is like multimodality. So I see that Replica supports text generation, image, and is it other format available right now, like video or audio?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So there's not any kind of real limit on the modalities that are supported. So there are a number of like video generation models. So it might be a little bit out of scope, but under the hood, every replicate model is using this is built using this open source tool called Cog. And so Cog is a tool that allows you to define a simple Python interface for your machine learning model and then package it um, in a Docker container with a standard HTTP API.
Mm,
So basically lets you stick your model into a web application with a consistent API around it. So it can accept these models can accept any types of files as inputs or outputs. So if you look around on the Replicate website, you'll see that there are models that can take in, like I was mentioning, Whisper that
mhm,
takes in speech audio as input and produces text as output. Or you can generate models. You can use models that take an image as input and generate a video as output, for example.
right.
There are other models that even do things that aren't even necessarily like machine learning
Mhm,
features, but like there's a model that does captioning. So
mhm,
those sort of like
mhm,
TikTok style subtitles that come across the bottom of the screen. Like you can upload a video and
mhm,
it'll apply those captions
mhm,
automatically and produce a new video. So that's a video to video model.
mhm.
So there's not really any limitation to the modalities of models supported on Replicate.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Super helpful. In terms of the computational power, I did see briefly that you have a lot of like A1s. How different is it from like local deployment for those who are like hobbyists looking to try it out?
Yeah, so if you go to, I think, replicate.com/billing
Mhm.
or pricing, um, there's a list of all the different hardware types supported there, and they all have different performance characteristics and price characteristics. And these are always kind of changing
Mhm.
as the market changes. So obviously, depending on the model, there's a pretty vast difference in the performance between running a model on a CPU and a GPU. So we're still in a world where GPUs are vastly faster
Mhm.
than CPUs for most of our use cases. So while there are some interesting capabilities coming out, especially around Apple's new stuff for Apple specific hardware, that whole field is obviously advancing really quickly. But
Mhm.
we're still in a world where for most of the models that you would want to run locally,
Mhm.
the performance is not there yet.
Right.
Um,
Mhm. Right. Yeah, I mean, we've covered a lot of topics. I mean, thanks for sharing some of the amazing things that Replicate has to offer, and all of the tips and tricks that you've shared is also very helpful for practitioners. Finally, like, is there anything else that you would like to share?
sure, yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. Hopefully this was useful. I know it's kind of off the cuff. I think something that's been on my mind lately is I recently took a trip to Europe and um, I was using the Claude app from Anthropic on my phone,
Mhm.
and I wanted to use it as a translation tool. And of course, people use Google Translate all the time, and it's pretty good.
Mhm.
But what I realized is that you could actually use a language model to um, provide multiple translations simultaneously. So I just wrote a simple prompt that said, "You are an English to Italian translator, and
Mhm.
every time I type a message, you type a translation to me, except you translate it 5 different ways,
Mhm.
and some of the translations are formal and some of them are informal
Mhm.
along the spectrum.
Wow.
Um, Go." And then I basically just had this long running chat with Claude for the entirety of my vacation, where whenever I want to translate something, I would just type it in, and then I had all these options that I could choose from, like, oh, I don't actually know how to say that, or that looks too informal for me to use it in this context.
Mhm.
But the sort of revelation for me was like these language models have become so sophisticated that there are so many different amazing apps that people can build on top of them where all of the hard work is being done by the language model. And all you have to do is build a compelling and simple user interface on top of that
Mhm.
that can deliver value to users. And you no longer are burdened by, oh, I want to make a translation app, but I can't boil the ocean to
Mhm.
figure out what all the translations are for, slang and formal from Italian to English. Like
Right.
that problem is now solved. So I think there's just a lot of opportunity for people to make really amazing new apps that are built on top of these models. And with things like Llama 3.1 coming out, being this 405 billion parameter model that's on par with the closed models that we're seeing like Claude and GPT-4,
Mhm.
um, more of this stuff is just going to be happening in the open source world. So it's very exciting.
Yep. 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 Super exciting. Now that you got the basics of Streamlit and Replicate covered in the prior segment, let's have a look at the app and also the code. So in this app, it was deployed on the Streamlit Community Cloud, which you could also do the same. A more in-depth tutorial on how to do that is already in a tutorial video on Streamlit app deployment. So I'll provide the links in the video description. So this is the app that we built in this video. And so you'll be able to see that you have the option of selecting an LLM model on the sidebar here. And we have the option of Meta Llama 3, Mistral, and also Gemma 2B. So in this demo, we're gonna select the default Llama 3, and then there's the slider widget for the temperature and the top P parameters. So you could also clear the chat history as well once you have a discussion going. So let me ask a question here. What is Python? And then it'll print out the response here. And a fairly detailed response at that. All right, and so let's have a look into the repository here. So this Streamlit Replicate chatbot app is shared in the Streamlit Cookbook GitHub repo, and you'll be able to go to the recipes folder here and then look for the Replicate subfolder. And then the app is residing here in the Streamlit app.py file. And then we also have the requirements.txt file, which provides the list of the prerequisite libraries. So here we have Streamlit, Replicate, and Transformers. Let's have a look at the Streamlit app. So in its entirety is exactly 100 lines of code. And you'll be able to see that we've imported necessary libraries in the first 4 lines. We have the app title on line number 7, which is right here, which we put in the sidebar. Elements of the sidebar is also in here as well, which is a description of the app. And then we're loading in the Replicate API token from st.secrets. So once you deploy the app, you'll be able to click here in the Manage App and then click right here, go to the settings, and you'll be able to click on the secrets here, and then you could provide the API token right in here in this tab. And then your API token is right here. Let's have a look further here. So these blocks of code is relevant to the API token, loading it in and then putting into the environment. And then we have the widgets for the model selection and the parameters right here in lines 22 until 33. And we're making use of the slider widget and also the select box. So here we're using select box for the dropdown, and then the st.slider for the slider widget. And then this allows the user to adjust the model parameters. Line number 35 and 37 is essentially collecting the chat history, and then you'll be able to remove it in the custom defined function here in the clear chat history. And then we provided the st button here for your convenience. When you click on it, it will run the clear chat history function via the onClick parameter. And then we're using the get tokenizer, get number of tokens, as a way to kind of like check the number of tokens that we're using for the responses, and also to prevent extensive use of the token here. So we set a limit to be here. And then lines 63 until 86 is essentially the LLM model response generation function. And then inside here is providing the prerequisite way to define the user and also the assistant prompt. And also we're limiting the number of tokens as well. And then lines 88 until 92 will provide the ability for a user to put in their chat message, their chat input via the st.chat input widget, which is right here. So user type it in here. And then if there is user message, this one will be populated, and then it will invoke the series of chain defined by the generate response function. And therefore, the LM model will then generate a response, and then it will be displayed. So the generate response here, lines number 94 until 100, it will generate the response as seen here. And so the more you type in, the more response it will generate. And it does retain memory. Let's try it out. What questions did I ask? There you go. We asked these 2 questions. And so that's all it is. And so it's super easy to spin up a Streamlit replicate chatbot. And so code will be provided in the video description. And so back to the other segment. Maybe would you like to share how others in the community could reach out to you or on social?
Sure. I'm Zeke on Twitter or X. Just like it's spelled right here. Zeke. I'm also Zeke on GitHub. So I actually follow my GitHub notifications. So if you Zeke me on a public repo issue or pull request, I'll probably notice it. Those are probably the best ways to get a hold of me. I'm also Zeke at replicate.com if you want to send me an email.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being on the show here.
Thanks for having me. Really excited that you're producing this new series of cookbooks. I'm glad to be the first one.
Yep. A pleasure.
Cool. Thank you.